Hey guys, today we are going to be working with the portrait, not full figure, just from head to shoulders, and maybe a little bit below that. I'm working with a photograph that I took myself. It has a single light source and is very high resolution, so you can see it has nice shadows, and I can see everything pretty clearly. Now, I'm going to start with a drawing. You can see that there is a little bit of a transfer image down there already. I've just use the method that we did in class to put some markers down for myself. As I've said, with watercolor paper, you don't want to do a lot of erasing, and with the portrait, there tends to be a lot of erasing, putting things back down, and that ruins the integrity of the paper. So I've just transferred the basic markers, and now I'm going to do a drawing on top of that. I'm starting here with the eye, and I definitely recommend starting with the eye, especially for the beginners. Get those eyes in there so that if you do them incorrectly, you can start over. Don't do the entire drawing and then do the eyes and find out that the eyes suck. That's the first thing we look at. It's the thing that is the focal point. It's the thing that tells us the most about the person, gives us those characteristics that we find so appealing. It's going to make us like the drawing and painting the most. So I've made sure that the eye is a sphere, the eyeball is a sphere, and that the lid actually wraps around the eyeball. That's really key for making this realistic. On top of that, I've also considering that the whole head is a sphere. So all the features are going to wrap around that sphere. The eyebrows are going to wrap around the sphere. The nose, in a certain sense, is going to wrap around that sphere. The mouth is wrapping around. It's not flat. None of those lines are going to be flat. They're going to be slight arcs. I've also put those eyelashes in thinking about the fact that the eyelashes come out of the eyelid in an arcing motion. They're not just flat, straight lines. You can see here I'm thinking about the mouth. Like I said, it's going to wrap around the face. Now, I've done the transfer image and to put the markers down, and I like that I'm doing a more serious drawing on top of that, and that the under transfer is just barely there. It's just to make sure that things are in the right place and that those two eyes especially are pretty much symmetrical. It's one of those things that we're going to notice really quickly. It's the first thing we're going to see when we come look at a painting. Oh my gosh, those eyes aren't symmetrical. I can see one is lopsided. They're not totally even. Make sure you can do a little measuring here. The space between the eyes is typically about the same size as the width of one eye. Little tips like that will really help you kind of figure out if things are in the right spot. You can see also that I've actually drawn in the shadows. I told you to do that in the past. Form and cast shadows are important. They're very important for this painting. Now, another thing that I see beginners do is they don't give enough space for the brain of the person that they're drawing. The eyes should fall about halfway down the face. You should give enough space for the back of the head. So always think about where your eyes lay and if there's enough space above and below for it to make sense. Those proportions are going to change for children. They're going to change for older people. Children are going to have bigger eyes that are even lower down in their head. Okay, now I'm starting the painting, and one of the things that I just want to point out, you guys are concerned about skin tone, and I'm using just burnt sienna there and a lot of water. Water is really, really key here. You can almost do no wrong, whatever, I mean, unless you're painting it super, super green or something, just as long as you put a lot of water in that paint mixture, so it's almost the consistency of like 1% milk, you're going to get the right color down. And you can see that I've done everything but the eyes. I'm even pushing that into the hair there. One of the things that we're going to be doing in class is thinking about the shadows. I've had it said to me a couple of times that there should be detail in the light areas and color in the shadows. So I'm actually looking at the shadows in my photo and I'm pushing those colors. I want you guys to kind of exaggerate the colors that you see. Do it as an experiment today when you're painting. I'm dropping in more of that sienna, and I should mention that this is on, I've waited for that under layer to dry so that I can get the sharp edges where I want them. But now I'm working the shadow shape while it's wet. And I've put in more sienna, and I'm thinking about now putting in alizarin and ultramarine. You can see there's deep dark shadows in there, but that shadow shape is wet, so they're not going to be hard-edged. There we've got some cadmium I'm dropping in. I'm getting creative with the colors that I see in the shadows. They're there. I want to push them farther. You can see I'm working with that big, round number 10 brush. I don't want to get into the details in the shadow. Like I said, color in the shadow, detail in the lighting areas. You can see I'm using a little bit of cadmium yellow there. There's also a little bit of lemon yellow in there as well. And now a little bit more cadmium red, some alizarin, cadmium, just pushing those colors in that shadow shape. And at first you might say, oh my gosh, that looks like it's pretty intense, but it's going to dry. It's going to dry lighter. And I know that by the end of this, I'm actually going to push those even darker with even more color. I'm thinking, of course, about the cast shadows and the form shadows. It's a form shadow around her nose. And then that triangle that's being created by the light on her cheek there, part of that's going to be a soft edge because that's form shadow. And then the other part of it is a cast shadow. So it's going to have a hard edge because it's being cast by her nose. You'll see that triangle shape a lot when you're working with a single light source and the portrait. Keep an eye out for it. Now I'm just working in some burnt umber for the hair. That's probably going to get darker too. I'm still working with that big brush. I'm just kind of moving around the portrait, waiting for certain areas to dry before I go in with more detail. You can see I'm pulling out highlights in some areas while it's still wet, making sure that hair is soft because of course hair is going to be soft edged. Now I'm going in with my liner brush. Everything is dry and I'm thinking about the colors. There's still some shadow underneath her eye in the form of cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, and I'm still adding a lot of water there. I don't want it to be so strong in that area because it's almost highlight, but there's just a little bit of shadow. And with that liner brush, I'm bringing in some umber. I think I've gotten it a little bit too wet, so I'm pulling it back out with a tissue and leaving it alone because I want it to be detailed. I'm emphasizing those eyelashes coming out of the eyelid again. And now I keep trying to go over there and work that other eye, but it's just a little damp and I can't get the detail that I want. You'll see me do that a couple more times in this video before I give up and let it totally dry. There I go again. You notice I haven't used any Misket here, or masking fluid, and that's because I don't really think I need to with this particular image. I left those eyes totally the white of the paper, and I'm going to leave the highlights in the eyes the white of the paper. That's going to make her feel more alive, and that's fairly important. So if you don't trust yourself to leave that highlight in the eye white, you can use some masking fluid and get that to be white until you're finished with the painting. I'm working in some of the nose area, and the thing about the nose is that you might want to minimize it. It's usually not going to be your focal point, and it has the tendency to be a focal point because of the nostrils and how dark the nostrils get. And they tend to be these kind of bullseye, sort of like you want to look there first, and that really isn't the objective. So I would minimize the shadows in the nose and go for the darks in the eye and secondarily the mouth, probably. So I've given up on that other eye for the time being. I'm going to just completely let it dry. So now I'm moving to the yellow of what she's wearing, and I'm not holding back with the colors here. Mostly cadmium yellow, a little bit of lemon yellow in there too. And now finally, after I've put that in, I think that other eye is dry enough for me to go in and do the details correctly. Still considering, is it symmetrical? Is it balanced? Have I lost the under drawing? Can I see where it should be? And part of her eye does fall into shadow, and I notice that a lot of times people they'll ignore the shadow that falls across an eye. Eyes have a lot of shadow in them. The eyeball is not totally white across the entire thing. It's round, and there are form shadows and there are cast shadows, and so the eyeball is not always going to be white, and that's a big mistake that people make a lot of times. You can see me there dropping in a little bit of a form shadow on the eyeball, and also there's a cast shadow from her nose. Okay, and now that that shadow is a little bit more dry, I can pop in a few more details to make that eye look complete. There's still shadow falling across it. And I'm continuing to work the shadows around the mouth and the nose. Now into the neck, making sure that that's nice and dark. It's probably going to get darker. And now I'm putting in some form shadows on the head wrap that she is wearing. I'm getting really creative with the colors. Again, I wouldn't be so concerned. You guys are so worried about the colors that you're using. But if this is a fairly limited palette, it's mostly warm tones in the cadmium range. And I'm not being too careful about whether those colors actually match the photograph. They basically match the photograph. And I'm mostly just worried about lights and darks, and the focal point is the face. Now you can see I'm laying in the final background there. Thinking about what color do I want it to be, because in the photograph it's kind of not that important. So I like the idea that she's wearing this bright yellow, so I'm going to maybe put in some violet in the back as a complement to make it a very strong color composition. See there, now finally to finish it up, I'm just going in and pushing the darks. We've talked about laying in the background, seeing where your values need to be stronger, and putting those in later. I'm just working on cast and form shadows, thinking about where they would fall on the figure. You can see I'm putting in details in certain places in the hair too, using that liner brush in some areas just to get a few more details, a few more darks. Not just using the umber, using a little bit of alizarin and kind of fiddling with the nostril a little bit there, and pushing some of my darks a little bit darker. Now, after I've worked that, I think the background needs to be darker, so I'm putting in some more background. And finally, we have the finished painting. My focus was on the eyes and the values in the shadows, and I think that was very successful. Not hard to see where the focal point should be, and you can get a fair amount of drama if you just use the right photograph and push those shadows.